Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, whatever the case may be. Here it is, Sunday. We're moving into our 7th day of our devotions this week, trying to come away with a meditation, something that really sticks to the ribs and can help us build and develop some spiritual life because it challenges our mind, our will, and our emotions. It's anointed by the Spirit and it becomes life to us. And so in order to do that, you have to enter into a meditative practice, which is exactly the opposite of every other form of meditation that's practiced on the planet, which is typically an emptying of thoughts and seeking to become still. Actually, it's the opposite. You take in the Word of God and you mull it over and focus upon it. And it becomes life. It becomes broken down and becomes life to your spirit, and then transformation energy for your mind, your will, and your emotions. And then, of course, your body benefits. If you've been stressed out, your body benefits, and so on. So as we're looking at this today, the thought that comes to mind is a large hay bale, huge hay bale. And the question arises, how do you take that on? You have a huge hay bale. Well, I'm going to look over here. I have one of the largest hay bales that's ever been set in the pasture. This is called the Bible. And we get intimidated when we look at the Bible and we say, 66 books and it's just jam-packed and loaded. How do I take that all in? I'll never get to know it all. Well, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. How do you whittle down that huge hay bale that's set in the pasture to bring life to you? One bite at a time. And eventually, the huge hay bale out in that pasture is broken down till it's all gone. It needs to be replaced with another one. And so we're looking at the Word of God sometimes. It's a huge hay bale and we say, what's the use? I'll never get it done. We bail out and we quit. And the enemy would love to have us do that. I want to encourage you to remember, how are we going to get that thing all in and digested? We're going to do it one bite at a time. Now, I'll give you a hint. You will never complete that hay bale. And remember that Jesus can take fish and bread, give thanks for them, hand them to you, satisfy you, and then they'll be multiplied. So this is an ever-multiplying hay bale. We're never going to outpace its ability to bring life. Isn't that a comfort? And so bear that in mind as we look into this today and think in the terms of meditation. And we're going to look at Hosea 5, take on 7 verses today, 8 through 15. Now God is talking about the results. He lays out his claim. He's been laying out his claim. This is what you've been doing wrong. This is how you have abandoned me. This is how you have gone off into idolatry. And then he says, sound the trumpet in Gibeah, the horn in Ramah, raise the battle cry in Beth-aven. Now, these are towns that belong to the tribe of Benjamin. Benjamin is the youngest son of Israel. Benjamin is the small tribe associated with the very large tribe, Judah, and they together, Benjamin and Judah, make up the southern kingdom that later then is called Judah. They refer to it all as Judah. It's kind of like when you get married and you get referred to by the husband's name. You kind of get lost and swallowed up in that. Sound the trumpet in Gibeah, the horn in Ramah, raise the battle cry in Beth-aven. Lead on, Benjamin. Why? Because Ephraim will be laid waste on the day of reckoning. What's going to happen is this area had formerly been heavily influenced by Ephraim, and because of Ephraim's great sins, the princely tribe of Ephraim, they will now be laid waste on the day of reckoning. Another way to look at this is the idea of being humiliated. If you're a prince, you tend to become exalted. Joseph was exalted. But how did he get to his exaltation? He got to his exaltation through humility. How does the tribe of Ephraim end up in this part of the story? In this part of the story, those who have become prideful will be now brought low. They'll be put back into the same position that Joseph began in. He began being sold by his brothers into Egypt, so to speak. He became then the prince of Egypt. And then he passes away in that role of Prince of Egypt. Now they have come out of Egypt. They've been established in the land. Ephraim has been a great leadership producing tribe, and they have been a prince amongst all the tribes, great and high honor, just like Joseph had. And he says they'll be laid waste on the day of reckoning. There is something about pride that it must be dealt with because it exalts itself over against the Lord. And the irony is, God himself is the epitome of humility. Consider that. I do a teaching on the sevenfold Spirit of God, and the short of it is God is the completion and fulfillment and fullness of humility. He takes a position of serving. He empties himself. He becomes small. He becomes approachable. He does everything that he does out of a spirit of humility. So what is the opposite of the spirit of humility? The spirit of pride. And what has Ephraim done? Ephraim has become prideful and then has gone after idols. He says, among the tribes of Israel, I proclaim what is certain. Judah's leaders are like those who move boundary stones. So he's not only talking to Israel, he's also saying and warning the same way with Judah. What were those who moved boundary stones? That's called claiming somebody else's property. That's a terrible thing. It's theft. Theft of somebody's inheritance. By changing the boundary stones, you reshape the tribal and individual family inheritances, and you basically rip them off. You forever change the way the inheritance looks and how much land you have. And no one would ever change the boundary stones to be a deficit to themselves. They would change the boundary stones in order to improve their own position unfairly. And he says, Judah's leaders are like those who move boundary stones, and I will pour out my wrath on them like a flood of water. Does that sound familiar? Like a flood of water. We know that the world was flooded by water. Now he's saying the wrath that has built up against you is very similar to what happened to the whole earth. The scale is different, but he uses that analogy. I will pour out my wrath on them like a flood of water. It will come in powerfully. It will absolutely disrupt. It will shake everything. It'll move everything. And why? Because they have not been humble. In fact, this has infected the border tribe to Ephraim was Benjamin, and the next tribe after that was Judah. And so the effect and the influence of Ephraim has affected Judah to the point that they have followed the princely example of Ephraim, but they have also bought in to the horrible example of this tribe, which used to be so glorious with its leaders, like not only Joseph, but Joshua was an Ephraimite. He says, I'm going to pour out my wrath on them like a flood of water. Ephraim is oppressed, trampled in judgment, intent on pursuing idols. I am like a moth to Ephraim. What do moths do? They get in closets and chew clothes. So he says, I'm going to begin to tear into things, even in small ways. I'm going to come against you, and it's going to be a moth to Ephraim like rot to the people of Judah. So what is a moth in Ephraim is going to become like a rot in Judah. Why? Because it's systemic. It's not only affecting Israel, it's affecting Judah, and Judah seems to be behind the game. He's lagging behind because Ephraim's leading. Ephraim is having this powerful effect, and it's having an effect into the next generation and down into not only Benjamin, but Judah. like rot to the people of Judah. When Ephraim saw his sickness and Judah his sores, then Ephraim turned to Assyria and sent to the great king for help. But he is not able to cure you, not able to heal your sores. So they had been reduced in power. They had been reduced in status as a northern kingdom. And now they're looking for agreement with the northern kingdom of Assyria to possibly realign themselves and find if they can recover from their economic disadvantage, from the problems from famines, everything else that is ravaging them. God is actually trying to get their attention, trying to show them that when I remove my hand of blessing, then this land is a very inhospitable place. And their response is not to return to the Lord, but to bring their sores that the Lord has brought into them, to go with those sores instead of to the Lord, to go to the north, to the king of Assyria. For I will be like a lion to Ephraim. So you thought the moth was bad? I will be like a lion to Ephraim, like a great lion to Judah. Why? I couldn't get their attention with the small things. So now it's time to step it up. And interestingly enough, later, Babylon would carry the imagery of the lion, but I'm thinking that Assyria also conveyed the imagery of the lion. I could be wrong on that. I'll reserve that judgment. I will tear them to pieces and go away. I will carry them off with no one to rescue them. Then I will return to my lair. Wow, what a powerful image. It begins with the moth, becomes a horrible sore, and then it culminates in the active, ferocious tearing of a beast of prey, the most feared one that they had in those regions was the lion. And he's saying, I'll start like a moth, but if you won't turn, you'll become sore. If you still won't turn to me for healing, then I will be like a lion and I will utterly tear you to pieces. Then I will return to my lair. Wow. Once he's accomplished that, he says, I will return to my lair. So it's the idea of I'll be kind of gone from view. Now, when your heart becomes hard, God seems to be nowhere around. When you're obstinate against the Lord, you go through increasing difficulties. And what's the purpose? The purpose is not merely punishment. The purpose is to get your attention and turn you around because you are loved. He says, then I will return into my lair until they have borne their guilt and seek my face. I'll wait for them to come seek my face. And they have to bear their guilt. Rather than it being forgiven, that requires coming to the Lord, realizing and confessing what you have done, and then giving it to Him and allowing Him to lift it from you. And that's what He has offered to do, but they have rejected it. So He says they're basically going to have to go and pickle in their problems until they wake up and seek my face. In their misery, they will earnestly seek me. So what can we bring away from that? The Lord starts small. He eventually scales it up because His objective is to rescue us to Himself jealously. And we are an eternal being. He knows the stakes. But there are times when we persist to a point that He doesn't give us over to reprobation. He gives us over to the desires of our heart. And then we go into them thinking it's all pleasure and finding the pain. And it's only in our time of conflict, crisis, and misery that we will typically seek the Lord. So meditate upon that and ask yourself this question: would I rather get miserable earlier if I'm not as obstinate and stubborn, would it decrease the misery factor because I'd turned to the Lord earlier? And the answer is yes. The other question we can ask ourselves is, am I earnestly, with all of my heart, seeking the Lord? Remember, He invites us to turn to Him. He invites us to return to Him. So, go with that today as we've worked through these 7 verses, and ask yourself that question. The Lord bless you. Hope to see you tomorrow.